I always thought I understood what peace felt like. For 30 years, Laura and I had lived a quiet, predictable life. The kind of life where everything ran like clockwork. We woke up at 6, shared the same brand of coffee every morning, and sat across from each other at the same oak table we bought the year we got married. She'd talk about the neighbors, her workout routines, and her new obsession with baking bread. I'd listen, nod, and pretend that everything was fine. It wasn't that we were unhappy, just comfortable. Too comfortable. The kind of comfort that slowly kills curiosity one quiet morning at a time. We were partners, roommates, maybe even old friends, but not the couple we used to be. I could feel it, but I didn't want to admit it. It's easier to believe routine means love, not fear of change. That morning began like any other. The sun broke through the curtains, soft and warm. Laura moved around the kitchen humming to herself, wearing that sky blue robe she always loved. But there was something different about her, an energy I hadn't seen in years. Her movements were lighter, her voice brighter. She looked alive. She set her coffee down and smiled at me. "I'm going on a short trip," she said. "Just 5 days with the girls. We booked a resort in Palm Springs. Spa, wine, and no responsibilities." I smiled back, genuinely happy for her. "You deserve it," I said. "You've been working hard. It'll be good to get away for a while." She came around the table and kissed my cheek, a brief, practiced gesture. "I'll call you when I get there." And then she was gone. Just like that. I stood at the window, watching her drive away in that silver SUV. The morning air was calm, the sound of birds mixing with the faint hum of the car's engine. For a moment, I felt something close to peace. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text message, my bank notification. A transaction of $1,500 had just been made at the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. My eyes blinked twice, trying to make sense of it. Hyatt Los Angeles, not Palm Springs. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a fraud charge. Maybe her car got cloned. But then a small, cold thought crept in, one that made my chest tighten. I opened the message again, reading it slowly, as if clarity would rewrite the truth. Same card number. Same name. Laura Marshall. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Every second felt heavier. I told myself to wait, to trust her. But deep down, my gut whispered the thing I didn't want to believe. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, without saying a word, I grabbed my car keys. The drive to Los Angeles blurred by. I don't remember the traffic lights or the songs on the radio. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every mile brought me closer to an answer I was terrified to face. When I finally parked outside the hotel, my reflection in the glass door looked like a stranger. I walked to the front desk, my heart pounding in my throat. The young woman behind the counter smiled politely. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Laura Marshall. She checked in a little while ago." She typed on her keyboard. "Yes, room 511. Booked under Laura Marshall and Ryan Cooper." The name hit me like a punch to the chest. Ryan Cooper. I knew that name. He was Laura's personal trainer. The man she always said was just a professional. The one who, according to her, motivated her to stay consistent. Now I knew what that really meant. I stood there frozen, my mind caught between disbelief and fury. The receptionist said something else, but I didn't hear it. All I could think about was that name. Ryan. Her smile when she mentioned him. The late workouts. The new perfume. Every memory twisted itself into a new kind of truth, one I could never unsee. My body moved before my brain caught up. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hall was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioner. When I reached room 511, I stopped. My hand hovered over the door. For a second, I wanted to turn back, pretend I never knew. Pretend my life was still intact. But I couldn't. I knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. Then footsteps. The lock clicked. And that was the moment my world began to fall apart. I stood there, frozen. The room seemed to close in on me. Laura's words echoed in my mind like a drumbeat, but they didn't make sense. For months. I repeated, almost to myself. For months. It was as though I was hearing the words, but they didn't belong to my world. This was a nightmare, one I had never imagined. The The life I had built, the years of trust and routine, all crumbling in a matter of seconds. Ryan, still standing in the doorway, shifted uncomfortably. I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew what he had done. He had taken my life and twisted it into something unrecognizable. I turned my gaze to Laura, trying to make sense of what had just been confessed. She was crying now, her face buried in her hands. Her apology seemed hollow, like an attempt to fix something that was already beyond repair. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, Laura stammered through her tears. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I cut her off, my voice cold, more controlled than I thought I could manage. You've been lying to me for 4 months, Laura. What part of that didn't mean anything? Her face crumpled as if my words had physically struck her. She looked at me, eyes pleading, but I could see the guilt in them, undeniable and raw. Her shoulders shook with sobs, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no remorse, only rage and disbelief. Ryan stepped aside, his eyes darting between us, unsure of what to do. I wanted to scream at him, to tear him apart, but I wasn't angry at him. Not entirely. He was just the instrument of my pain, the one who had taken advantage of the trust one had placed in him. But the real betrayal, the real heartache, was from the woman I had loved for 30 years. I turned and walked toward the elevator without another word. I needed air, space, distance from the suffocating weight of the situation. I needed to think. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced through every memory I had of Laura. The moments we shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the plans we had for the future. All of it seemed so meaningless now. How could she do this? How could I have missed the signs? I thought I knew her better than anyone. I thought we were solid. I arrived back at the house, empty and silent. The familiar walls that had once felt so safe now felt like a prison. The house, once a home, had turned into a place I no longer recognized. I walked through the living room, stopping at the framed photos of us on the mantel. Our wedding day, vacations, birthdays, smiling faces, happy moments. All the lie. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Not with the echoes of betrayal ringing in my ears. The decision was clear. I needed to move out. I needed to leave this house behind. The next morning, I went to work, though I barely remember driving there. My colleagues greeted me with the usual pleasantries, but I barely registered their words. My mind was somewhere else, trapped in that hotel room, in the words Laura had spoken, in the silence that followed. But the moment I sat down at my desk, I knew what I had to do. I pulled up my browser and started searching for divorce lawyers. I couldn't waste time. The sooner this was over, the sooner I could start rebuilding my life. I was no longer the man I had been. The life I had known was gone. I had been betrayed in the worst possible way. And now, I was going to make sure that betrayal didn't define the rest of my life. I hired the best divorce attorney in Los Angeles. She was sharp, meticulous, and experienced. She listened to my story without judgment, without offering false sympathy. Her focus was on getting results, and that was exactly what I needed. We reviewed the evidence I had, texts, photos, the hotel receipts, even the depositions of friends who had noticed changes in Laura's behavior. The case was strong. Laura had made a fatal mistake, and it was going to cost her everything. But I wasn't doing this out of vengeance. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't interested in punishing her. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. About finding my own path, my own freedom. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. Every day, I felt a little lighter, a little more detached from the wreckage of my past. I sold the house that had once been our sanctuary, and moved into a small, modern apartment in the city. It was nothing like the suburban home I had once dreamed of, but it was mine. It was a fresh start. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe again, to let go of the past, to reclaim my future. As the months went by, I began to rediscover parts of myself that I had long forgotten. I took up cooking, something I'd always wanted to try, but had never made time for. I signed up for classes, met new people, and explored places I'd never imagined visiting. I wasn't the man I had been, but I was beginning to understand who I was becoming. One morning, about a year after it all fell apart, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping a cup of coffee. The city was waking up below me, and I felt calm, at peace. A notification popped up on my phone, and I glanced at it. It was from my bank, a reminder of the day that had changed everything. The transaction from the hotel in Los Angeles. I smiled to myself. That day, those few minutes of heartbreak had led me here, to a life where I wasn't defined by the betrayal of others. A life where I had found peace in the chaos. The truth had set me free. The months after the divorce were a quiet revelation. I hadn't expected peace to come so soon after the storm. At first, it felt like a constant hum in the background, a faint noise that reminded me of what had been lost, but not of what was gained. Every day was a process of building myself up from the ground, but every day also felt like a small victory. The first day I spent in my new apartment was one of those victories, and every moment since has been a little better than the last. I focused on simple things, little tasks that, years ago, I would have taken for granted. I started taking long walks in the mornings, exploring the city's hidden corners. There was something incredibly liberating about being out there, in the bustling streets of downtown, among strangers in their lives. The anonymity was comforting. It allowed me to simply exist without anyone knowing the history that weighed me down. I spent weekends visiting local farmers markets, tasting fresh fruits I'd never tried before, experimenting with recipes that seemed too difficult when I was married. Cooking became my new ritual. The smell of garlic and rosemary filling my apartment, the sizzle of food in the pan. These small moments grounded me. They were a contrast to the world I had once known. They were mine, and only mine. But even amidst these moments of self-discovery, the questions still lingered. How had Laura changed so much in the last few years? Was she ever the woman I thought I knew? How did Ryan, someone I had trusted, become the catalyst for my life's unraveling? But I didn't linger too long on these questions anymore. They were ghosts from a life that no longer belonged to me. I realized that it wasn't the answers I was seeking, but the freedom to let go. So I moved forward. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself sitting at a cafe on the edge of the city, reading a book I had picked up on a whim. It wasn't something I would have chosen before, historical fiction, something I'd once considered boring. But now it fascinated me. The way the author brought history to life, the characters and their flawed decisions, their moments of redemption. It spoke to me in a way I didn't expect. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced out the window and noticed a woman walking by. She was older than me, maybe mid-60s, and she had a kind face, one that seemed familiar but not in a way I could place. She looked at me for a moment, then smiled, a genuine, open smile. I smiled back, not thinking much of it, until she stopped. She walked toward my table and stood there for a moment, as if deciding whether to approach. "Excuse me," she said with a soft voice. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I couldn't help but notice your book. It's one of my favorites." I blinked, surprised at the sudden interaction. "Really? It's been a good read so far," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Have a seat if you like." She smiled, grateful for the invitation, and sat down. We exchanged pleasantries, and as we talked, I found myself relaxing into the conversation. It was easy to talk to her, and there was something about her energy that put me at ease. She wasn't trying to impress me or make small talk for the sake of it. She was just there, present. We spent the next few hours talking about books, life, and the unpredictable nature of human relationships. It felt light and effortless, something I hadn't felt in a long time. She was a widow, she told me, and had recently moved to the city to be closer to her daughter. Her husband had passed away a few years ago, and she said she had spent a lot of time grieving, but now she was beginning to reclaim parts of herself she'd long forgotten. Her words resonated with me more than I anticipated. I had spent so long grieving the life I had lost with Laura, but here was a woman who had faced an even greater loss and had come out the other side stronger. She wasn't bitter or resentful. She had found a way to live with her grief, to let it be a part of her story, but not her whole story. As the afternoon turned to evening, we parted ways with a promise to meet again. I didn't expect anything to come from it. Maybe a new friendship, or maybe just a pleasant afternoon to remember. But as I walked home that evening, I realized something. I was beginning to open myself up to the world again, to the possibility that life could be rich and full, even without the certainty I once thought I needed. The following months brought more changes. I kept up with my cooking, with my walks, with the quiet life I had built. I took small trips on weekends, exploring places that had once seemed too far away or too complicated to visit. And during one of these trips, I made the decision to sign up for a writing class. It felt like the right time to tap into a creative outlet I had never allowed myself to explore. But it wasn't just the big things that changed. It was the little things, too. I began to take better care of myself. I made time for friends, reconnected with old colleagues, and even started taking up hobbies I had abandoned over the years. I realized I had spent too much time trapped in the shadows of my past, allowing the betrayal to define me. But now I was choosing to define myself on my own terms. In the quiet moments, when the sun was setting and I could feel the weight of everything I had lost and everything I'd gained, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally at peace with the imperfections. I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift life gives you is the ability to start over, to heal, and to grow. And that was exactly what I was doing. As I sat at my new favorite cafe one afternoon, watching the city move around me, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude for how far I had come. I had been through the storm, and though it had torn me apart in ways I never imagined, it had also cleared the way for something new. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. The past had shaped me, but it would no longer define me. The days that followed seemed to slip by more quickly than I anticipated. Life in the city became a rhythm I welcomed. The noise, the chaos, the people, they all became a part of my new identity, one I was slowly but surely starting to embrace. My apartment, which had once felt like a cold refuge from the world, was now a home, a place that was mine, filled with the small signs of life I had created for myself. I had become accustomed to my own company, something I hadn't thought I would enjoy. For years, I had shared every moment with Laura, and to be alone was initially unsettling. But over time, it became clear to me, solitude wasn't the same as loneliness. I had come to learn that solitude could be nurturing. It allowed me space to breathe, to rediscover who I was without the weight of another's expectations. Writing classes were a new addition to my routine. It started as a way to keep myself distracted, a challenge to move my mind away from the ghosts of my past. But it quickly grew into something more. The words that once felt foreign to me, writing my feelings, my experiences, my journey, began to flow more easily. There was a strange satisfaction in crafting sentences that captured parts of myself I had never explored before. Writing gave me a way to process the storm of emotions that still lingered inside, a way to translate what had happened into something that made sense. One afternoon, I found myself working on a story about a man who had experienced a betrayal much like my own. It was a cathartic experience, almost therapeutic. The more I wrote, the more I could feel the weight of the past lifting from my chest, piece by piece. I realized then that I had not only come to terms with what had happened, but I had also found a way to rebuild, through words, through new experiences, through small but powerful shifts in the way I saw the world. But it wasn't just the big changes, the moves to a new apartment or the writing classes that defined this new phase of my life. It was the subtle, quiet moments, the slow but steady process of unlearning the patterns I had built up over 30 years. That was when I met Susan. It was a Wednesday evening, and I had just finished a writing class. I stepped into a small local bookstore that I had passed countless times, but never ventured into. The store had a warm, welcoming glow, and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee hung in the air. It was the kind of place that made you want to lose track of time. I was browsing the shelves when I noticed her, Susan, standing a few feet away, scanning through the same shelf. She looked up and caught my gaze, her smile inviting but reserved. She looked familiar in some strange, unplaceable way, but I couldn't quite figure out why. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. I see you're looking at the same book I just finished. What did you think of it? I smiled back, slightly taken aback. It was fantastic, actually. It had me hooked from the first chapter. She nodded, her eyes lighting up in the way only someone who truly enjoyed books could. We began talking about literature, what we were reading, the books that had shaped us, the ones we couldn't put down. It was easy to talk to her, something I hadn't expected. The conversation flowed naturally, like we had known each other for years. It was the first time in a long while that I felt that sense of connection with someone. The awkwardness of a new interaction, the anxiety of trying to make a good impression, it was all gone. I was myself for the first time in ages, without the need to hide or play a part. As the evening wore on, we decided to grab coffee together at a nearby cafe. We talked about our lives, our passions, and everything in between. I learned that Susan was a writer too, someone who had gone through her own trials and tribulations, someone who understood the complexity of relationships and the long road to healing. She shared stories of her travels, her experiences with the ups and downs of life, and the lessons she had learned along the way. There was something about the way she spoke, so effortlessly honest, yet hopeful, that made me feel lighter, like I was not alone in my struggle to move forward. When the evening ended, we exchanged numbers, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of excitement. I wasn't sure where it would lead, perhaps nowhere, but for the first time in a long time, I felt open to the possibility. Over the next few weeks, Susan and I met up regularly. We spent time in bookstores, talked over coffee, and shared our stories. But it wasn't just the companionship that stood out to me. It was how comfortable I felt around her, how easy it was to be myself without the burden of the past weighing down every interaction. We talked about our journeys of healing, the way time had allowed us to become stronger versions of ourselves, but also more empathetic, more understanding of what it meant to struggle. She had been through her own battles, but she had emerged from them with a new sense of purpose, much like I was beginning to do. And slowly, as our conversations deepened, I realized something. I wasn't just healing from my past. I was rediscovering the possibility of connection. I wasn't ready to jump into anything new or force something I wasn't sure about. But I was learning day by day that opening myself to new experiences and new people didn't mean I was forgetting what had come before. It simply meant I was living again. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on how far I had come. It was a strange feeling, satisfaction, peace, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but it was a moment of quiet realization. The man I had been before, the one who had trusted blindly, the one who had been devastated by betrayal, he no longer existed. In his place was someone who had learned to live with the pain, someone who had found a new path, not by erasing the past, but by accepting it and moving forward. I wasn't sure where this new journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer afraid to live it. I had found my way back to myself, and I had learned that the most important thing was not the destination, but the willingness to embrace the journey, no matter where it took me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The quiet hum of the city outside my apartment was something I had come to enjoy. I had made my peace with the fast-paced rhythm of the world, and yet it didn't feel overwhelming anymore. The sounds, the honking cars, the distant chatter from cafes, the whoosh of the subway beneath my feet had become a backdrop to my newfound life, one that I had intentionally crafted for myself, brick by brick. Susan and I had continued seeing each other, though in a slow, deliberate way. There was no rush, no pressure. It was as though both of us had learned the value of taking things one step at a time, of giving each other space to breathe, to grow. There was no mention of labels or expectations, but there was a sense of mutual respect and understanding that felt natural. I didn't need to force anything. I didn't have to prove anything to her or to myself. Over time, I realized that in her company, I no longer felt like I was healing from something, but rather growing into someone. It was as though the journey to rediscovering myself had led me to a place where I could embrace a life that was both rich and unpredictable, filled with possibilities rather than regrets. One evening, we were sitting on a bench in a park near her apartment, watching the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. We had been talking about our future, and though we weren't planning anything together just yet, it felt good to entertain the idea of what if. What if we just kept living this way? She asked, her voice thoughtful as she turned toward me. Living for today and seeing where life takes us. I smiled at the simplicity of it, and yet it felt profound in the moment. I think that's the best plan I've heard in a while. She laughed softly, and for a moment, we sat in silence, just watching the world go by. It was one of those rare moments of clarity where you realize that life doesn't have to follow a script, it just has to be. We were both exactly where we were supposed to be, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I was living it. I had started to get involved in more community activities, volunteering at a local shelter, and even signing up for a few art classes. The city had a way of pushing you to expand your horizons, to try things you would have never considered before. I was no longer just Ethan Marshall, the man who had been betrayed. I was Ethan Marshall, a man who had reinvented himself, someone who was living a life that was his own, not defined by past mistakes or regrets. One Saturday, I decided to take a spontaneous trip out of the city. I had heard about a small coastal town a few hours away, known for its quiet beaches and historic lighthouse. It felt like the perfect escape from the usual buzz of city life. I rented a small cabin by the sea and spent the weekend exploring the beaches, watching the waves crash against the shore, and finding solace in the simplicity of it all. It was there, sitting on the rocky cliff overlooking the ocean, that I realized how far I had come. I had spent years believing that my happiness was tied to a single person, a single life. I had thought that the life I had built with Laura was all I would ever need. But now, I understood that happiness didn't come from any one source. It wasn't dependent on someone else's actions or decisions. It was something I could create for myself, in my own time, in my own way. I returned to the city with a renewed sense of purpose. I had learned something profound during that weekend trip, that I didn't have to know exactly where my life was headed to enjoy it. The future was uncertain, yes, but it wasn't something to fear anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward, and that was enough. As I continued to meet with Susan and deepen our connection, I found myself more and more open to the idea of the future, but not in the way I once had. I wasn't looking for a grand plan or a perfect outcome. I was simply living moment by moment, allowing the pieces of my life to fall into place as they would. One evening, as we sat at our favorite cafe, laughing over coffee and watching the sun dip behind the skyline, she turned to me, her expression soft. She said, her voice low, I never thought I'd find someone who just gets it, who understands what it means to let go of the past and really live in the present. I looked at her, my heart light, and without thinking, I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. I feel the same way, I said. I never thought I'd be here, but here I am, and it feels right. And it did. For the first time in a long time, I felt that everything was falling into place, not because I had it all figured out, but because I had stopped fighting against it. I had stopped trying to control the outcome. I had learned that it wasn't about perfection or timing. It was about living fully, embracing the journey, and trusting that the path would reveal itself in time. Life, I realized, had a way of surprising you. It had a way of taking you through the darkest moments, only to lead you to something unexpected. It wasn't the ending that mattered. It was the journey that defined you. And as I sat there, in that small cafe with Susan's hand in mine, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. I had found my peace. And in that peace, I had found my freedom.